Hey, welcome everyone. Uh, this is my friend Kendall, and we want to have a conversation today about some stuff. And we are hoping that this becomes a regular thing. I've been watching lots and lots of church videos lately from my friends and other people, and see how people are doing things, and it's been very interesting. And I've been learning a lot, and I've been really trying to think about some different ways to engage as the church during times when we can't be like personally and physically together. Kendall, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Kendall, if you don't mind just kind of introducing yourself, and then we can I'll talk a little bit more about what I'm thinking here.
Okay, I'll go like super condensed. Otherwise, I'll take up the whole time talking about me. Um, Pentecostal background. I fled Pentecostalism in my 20s. Pastored, in pastoral work for 33 years, pastored for 20. I stopped pastoring in early 2017 due to the health of my son. I have a special needs son that needs the attention of both my wife and I. In fact, we had something come up today where we both had to get him up off the floor. But that's a different subject. He's the light of our life, and the world revolves around him. So I stopped pastoring because of that, not because I didn't love it anymore. I missed it terribly. Had my first experience with depression after leaving pastoring, because I almost think, and this is something maybe at some point we could talk about, but I think I almost had an unhealthy attachment to pastoring, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
I think it meant a little too much to me. Not that I forsook other things that needed to be taken care of, but anyway, I stepped away from that. Really struggled with it for a few months. Once I was out of that struggle, I realized just how good it was for me to be away from it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure.
And not that I'm anti-church or anti-pastor, but it just, for me personally, it was, I'm very happy with where I'm at. So at this point, my life revolves around just making a living out of my house and being here for my boy. He's 24 years old now. He had brain cancer when he was 5. The treatments, the years of all the complications that have resulted from brain cancer have kind of left him a shell of his former self. So we focus our whole life around him, and it's a joy. It's one of those things you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. At the same time, I wouldn't trade it for anything, which I can't possibly explain that. So at this point, that's who I am.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm a dad and a husband, and right now that's mostly it.
So a little story personal story that I have about your son. I play I play in a band. To introduce myself, I guess I'm Todd Seelau, and I am a pastor in the United Methodist Church. I'm a pastor of a church. I am planting a church right now called X-ile, and we meet out in public places, mostly at bars. Around New Mexico, and we have a couple of branches doing some different things up in Montana and Austin, and we're kind of expanding to some other places. But I'm a drummer in a rock band also, and we tour around a lot. And the whole way we do church kind of started while my band was on tour. We used to have church at campsites and things like that, and we called it Outlaw Church. And we decided when we came to record a record in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that we would try to get something like that started, but where people could meet week after week. And so we were used to kind of doing like a service at a campsite or a bar somewhere, and then we wouldn't see people again for 6 months or 9 months or whatever. And so there was really no continuity or community really being formed. We would keep up with a lot of people on Facebook and social media, but there really wasn't the kind of community that we've formed since then. And so when my band was coming through California, I came and preached at Kendall's church and hung with his family. And like I was saying, my band plays at a lot of biker events. And something really cool about bikers and people in motorcycle clubs is that giving gifts are very is a very important thing. To give somebody something to take with them is an important cultural thing in a lot of motorcycle clubs. And also I have a friend who's Samoan, and he also is very, very into giving gifts. You never go to his house without him giving you something. And I still have this. But when I left Kendall's house and we hung out for a couple of days, Kendall's son gave me a bracelet that he got, I believe from the zoo, and I still have it. And I should have brought it. I live about an hour away from here, but I look at that and I remember him, and I remember his struggle. I remember his journey, and I think about him every time I see that. And that gift that he gave me really has meant a lot to me, and I know it was something that was very special to him that he wanted me to have, and that meant a lot to me. And I think that's I don't know, that's a special memory that I'll always have.
Cool.
Of you guys.
I love that.
And you have a very, very special son, and he's a really great kid.
Yeah, I want to be like him when I grow up, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's a good example to all of us.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is, this is, like I said, I've been watching a lot of different church services and videos and things that people are doing, because now that we're quarantined, we don't do as much in person, which to me, in my mind, kind of opens a big opportunity, because Kendall's in California, I'm in New Mexico, but we can still have a conversation like this. And this opens the door for a lot of things. And as people get used to watching things online, I feel like we can have conversations. And so I don't know how often I want to do this, but I want to regularly have conversations that we put up on our website, put them up on Facebook, with anywhere from 2 to 4 people about certain topics, certain things that we can discuss. And then hopefully people can make comments. And if we end up doing it on a Facebook Live or something, we can even kind of see what people are doing. But for right now, we're going to start slow. We're going to start simple, and we're going to kind of just get something going here. And then we're going to see kind of where this leads us organically. But I love the idea of people talking to each other rather than just hearing one person kind of talk. Not that that's not good too, because I love TED Talks. I love a lot of the church services I've been watching. I love a lot of the things that people are doing. But the thing that's missing to me is sometimes the community. And in our church, we have conversations about the Bible. There really isn't like preaching in the traditional way of preaching. We have conversations about that. So I want to kind of start having these conversations. And Kendall was kind enough to come and join me, where we kind of can talk about things we believe, things we don't believe, things we don't know about, things we don't understand. And we're not like looking for answers here. We're not telling everyone what the answers are. We're not trying to have a monopoly on the truth here, but we're trying to be on a journey together and discover this stuff together. So Kendall, can you start by sharing a little bit of your experiences about community when it comes to church, or what kind of role the idea of community plays in your idea of what the church is about?
You know, and maybe it's my background coming through. I'm not really sure about that, but community is, in my experience, the most difficult part of the church to build. I can do a church service. I haven't been to church in a while. I haven't preached in a while, but I'd get up at 3 a.m. and start a service tomorrow morning. I mean, I can do it in my sleep, you know. That's the easy part, and it's the fun part, honestly. And I think sometimes we kind of go overboard in saying that church service, speaking, whatever, isn't, you know, we'll kind of downplay that and say it's not important. It is important. I think it's very important to be able to communicate whatever it is you're trying to get across. I think it's important to communicate it. However, that's the part that I found to be easy and enjoyable. It was like it was the dessert of it all. But building community, getting people out of their comfort zones for some of them, getting people out of their busy lives, works, little league, soccer, family stuff, you know, to pull not out of that, but to get on the list of 75 other things they already have to do and be number 76 on that list to get into a community setting was really challenging for me. That was, I look back at my 30 years and say, that's where I failed the most, because it is the most difficult part, but it's the most important part. Because when you build community, when you get involved in the lives of other people, that's when really the idea of the gospel, the gospel is applied to so many things. We apply it to, I know from my background, if you talk about the gospel, you're talking about a preacher, up with a microphone screaming really loud. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you kind of get the idea. But the gospel really is when we get involved in the lives of other people. For I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me to drink. When you actually start contributing to the life of someone else, love your neighbor as yourself. And I'm doing a video on that tomorrow, by the way. But the idea of getting involved in the life of your neighbor, in someone else, thinking outwardly rather than inwardly, that is really a challenge, because we all have our stuff. I got my bills to pay, I got my things I got to do, I got my yard to mow, I got my list of 75 things that I've got to do. And putting community, getting involved in somebody else's life, that can really be a challenge. At least it was for me. And
yeah, totally.
It's hugely important.
And those scriptures you mentioned are really good. And I think there's so many scriptures that talk about that I think sometimes we take for granted, or we don't think about it that way,
Absolutely.
like what, when, I was hungry and you fed me, there has to be community, right? Like, how do you know if someone's hungry? There's a lot of assumptions, right? That is in the scripture that we already value community, because in the Jewish life, community was already so valuable.
Yes.
There wasn't they didn't have to sell people on that. So they made some assumptions about that. I think Jesus made some assumptions about that when he talked about some of these things. And like the Great Commission, as you are going, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There's an assumption that we're going to be moving and going, and assumption we're going to run into people, and the assumption we're going to have community and be involved in people's lives. And with things like what are happening right now, we're not allowed to be, or we're not able to, really be a part of people's lives the way that we used to be, or the way we're comfortable with, or the way we've gotten into habits of, which I think is really, could be a really cool thing, because now we have to value it differently, and we have to look at it differently and find some other ways of doing it. And there's just so much, that Jesus talks about that just assumes community. The first thing Jesus did right after he was baptized was he went out into the desert and spent some time alone. And then immediately after that, he went and he started making friends, right? Yes. He went and he's like, hey, come hang out with me. Come follow me. Come be a part of this. And he would go to the fishermen and some tax collectors and some, other people. And he would tell them, hey, come be a part of this thing. And he created community. So, I think that seeing how Jesus did that kind of shows us how that can be really important and valuable,
Definitely. And depending on one's interpretation, or how the application of verses or portions of scripture, depending on how you look at that, anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 of the New Testament has to do with interpersonal relationships. And we get really caught up in worshiping God, right? That's the really big deal. At least, again, in my background. That's where I come from. And I've tried to kind of exit that a bit over the years, to center on each other, at least as much as we center on this idea of worshiping God. Because in a lot of church settings, the idea is, let's come on Sundays and worship. Well, what does that mean? And if you want to get literally scriptural about it, where is that scripturally? Where do we, how much is that talked about? But yet that's what we center on, coming together and worshiping. or houses of worship or places of worship. The greatest worship is how we treat each other, how we are involved in one another's lives. If my neighbor is elderly and recovering from a hospital visit or whatever, I worship by mowing his yard. In our son's first brain surgery that he went through, we were gone for 12 days and we left very suddenly. And we left without preparing anything. We just left because we had to go to San Francisco immediately. When we got back, a guy across the street had kept all of Natalie's plants watered and alive. Like the place looked way better than it did when we left. And like, that's amazing worship. That's interpersonal relationships. And we even see Jesus say in a few places, Matthew 6, if you don't forgive others, you will not be forgiven. We see it in a number of places where he says, if you, in fact, the chapter before, Matthew chapter 5, he says, if you bring a gift to the altar and there you remember you got a problem with somebody, go take care of the person first, then come back. And there is clearly there is a blockage between us and God, at least if you're going to take the Bible absolutely literally, or at least some of these sayings of scriptures. There's a dividing wall between us and God if we don't take care of each other. How we take care of each other is how we take care. And I quoted Matthew 25. Yeah. I was hungry. Jesus was speaking of himself there. How I treat you, Todd, is how I treat Jesus. And I think we get so caught up in worship. Man, it's easy to go to church and sing a song that really moves us, and songs that just really get us, and we raise our hands or whatever, or we cry and we do all this stuff. And then we go treat people like,
exactly.
I almost slipped there.
Exactly.
I guess I got to keep this PG, right? We treat each other terribly, but in church, man, we're great. We're awesome. Exactly. And I'm seeing. I'm sorry, I don't mean to take over here, but
no, it's great.
Now I had somebody come to me years ago. This young fellow had an issue with a substance he was abusing, and he had some ambitions for a career, and it didn't work out. And he was back at home, out of college, and he was really highly abusing the substance. And I said, well, what causes you to do this? And he said, I need to be away from everything for 2 or 3 hours. I just need to be numb to it all.
Yeah.
And I need to just be away from it for 2 or 3 hours. And I don't do this God spoke to me stuff. I don't want to say that because I think that gets said too loosely sometimes. But there was something, I don't know, I can't really explain this, but something that just hit me that when he said that, and I just like could feel this to the point I wanted to explore it further when we got finished with the lunch. But there was this thing that said to me, that's what people do with church.
Yeah.
Like, wow, what does that mean? So I went home and thought about that. And I thought of, I've watched this happen. You see a married couple angrily get out of the car, storm into the church, come in and for a couple of hours get their fix, and they're okay.
Yeah.
But when it's all over with, they go right back to their crappy marriage, their crappy job, to their crappy life, to their crappy home where nobody likes anybody. And it stays that way until next Sunday. And nothing ever changes, but they got high for a couple of hours, metaphorically.
Right.
And it's like, that's how we treat church. And we like, that has nothing to do with community. And the church that you pastor that Gil does now, it's Acts 2, I think it's called, right?
Yeah.
Which, okay, from my background, Acts 2 means a completely different thing, but it's all about tongues, like Acts chapter 2. But at the end of that chapter is the definition of community. It is beautiful. The end of that chapter, what it says, to the point. Should I jump into socialism here or not? I probably better not.
We'll save that for a different.
Yeah. I'll just leave it to where we only lose a few friends, right?
A few friends each time, and then we can talk about whatever we want. No one
we'll be down to nothing. We can say anything.
That's right.
Okay, but at the end of that chapter, you know this, where everyone sold everything they have and they put it all together and they distributed to each one as they had need. The commitment, that's not a commitment okay, I want to say this carefully. That's not necessarily a commitment to God. That's a commitment to one another.
Right.
Like, wow,
Right.
how amazing is that?
Exactly.
And
I love that, dude. I love
oh
that.
God, it's amazing. Like
And you know, to take it away even from the politics of it, like this is something like my friends that like socialism talk about that a lot. My friends that don't like it talk about that in the respect that they chose to do that, like they willingly did that, so it's different from the government. But either way, right? It's a beautiful thing, and it shows commitment to one another. And I think that that's a really important point is that community has to be a part of worship in some way. For it to be, worship's a weird thing, like and I would love to talk more about that, specifically just what is worship, and maybe even have a few conversations with a few people about that, because that's a weird thing, because everything I worshipped in my life, I was told like not to, right? Like you know, you play video games a lot when you're a kid, or you get into alcohol, or you get into things, and you begin to worship, begin to put it higher than other things. You know, Paul Tillich said that you worship, or you're having faith in whatever your highest priority is, and there's something really to that. But I was very much taught, well, don't do that, don't worship this, don't worship that, don't worship, you know, don't worship idols, don't, you know. But there isn't much in my life that I've been told like, hey, like worship, like it's good to worship this thing. Like that's a weird idea. The idea of worship is a really weird thing, and I feel like it's so important to kind of think about what we mean by that, because we probably mean different things. My church is called X-ile, and we typically make food for kids on the weekend. They get free lunch during the week. So we meet at a bunch of different bars, and we pack up food bags, and we talk about the Bible, and we have an open mic. And but when this quarantine hit, obviously we couldn't be around a bunch of kids and giving food away to kids. But in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there's a large population of homeless folks who is getting bigger. That population is getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. And I have a friend whose church had to shut down downtown Albuquerque, and he didn't have the resources, or wasn't able to feed all these people. But there's all these people that need food and need help. So we shifted our resources, what we were doing, to buy food for the kids. We started to buy food for the homeless folks. And I was just right before we did this tonight, I was talking with him, and I dropped a bunch of food off, and I was talking with him, and they have a church that meets there called Community of Hope, which is a really, really cool church, and it's a new church, a couple years old, but it's all homeless people that make up this church. So like their offerings aren't really great, and things have to be a lot different, right, from what other things are. And a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their mind around that, just like they have a hard time wrapping their mind around me having church at a bar. Like people have a hard time with that, which is okay. But when he was telling me, he was like, whenever the quarantine started, they kept meeting, but they just started to feed folks because they couldn't do communion or a sermon or other things like they usually do. And we were talking about like, why is that not worship? You know, like getting together with a bunch of hungry people and eating together. Like why is that? Why don't we count that as worship? Why doesn't that count, you know, in some people's minds as worship? Because we're literally like treating the least of these in our society as we would want to treat Jesus, which is what, you know, Matthew 25 is about. And as much as we need to treat each other well, and people that we would share and hold everything in common with, because we have a good community and we trust them and we love them, you know, Jesus takes it a step further and says, well, what you do to the least of these, like, is what you're doing to me. So it's not even like us who are friends who even have a hard time sometimes sharing stuff, but the least, like the worst people, the people you like the least, the people you don't want to be around, the people that might smell bad, the people that you don't respect, the people that, whatever it is, whatever the least of these is to you, that's a way higher Jesus calls us to do things that I feel like on our own we're not really even able to do, but we can try, you know, and we can work toward that, and we can challenge ourselves. And I think, to me, that's the beauty of community, is that, number one, I have to put up with people that I don't want to put up with in community. And
Absolutely.
that used to be my least favorite part of church, but now it's becoming my favorite part of churches, because it helps me grow.
Yep.
And my buddy is a great example, who I was just talking with, because he's like so calm. And so we were talking all about that. You know, he understands he understands what's important, you know, and I really envy that sometimes, because I get all caught up in the wrong things a lot of times. And I think what that does is that community helps center us and makes us deal with people we don't want to deal with, but it also gives us ideas from people that, in a way that we don't usually think about it. And that's very valuable to me. We talk about the Bible with atheists and agnostics and people from other Christian denominations, people that have quit the church, people that still go to church. It's just this big group of people, and we all read the Bible. And I've heard the same narrative about all these stories for my whole life, but I get to hear from people that are reading it for the first time.
Yeah.
And they usually have a way better idea or better questions about it than what I have, because I already have it figured out, right? Because I went to school, they told me the answers. They haven't gone to school, so they don't know the answers, but it's like, wow, like, how did I never think of that?
Love that.
And so those people that I think are pushed out of church so much are the people that I learn the most and I gain the most theologically from. And to me, that's some of the beauty of community and why it's so important. So if we just hang around with the people we like and that think like us, and we get in Facebook groups and we all just rant about the same stuff and we all agree, it just makes us feel right about everything. And then when we run into somebody that thinks differently, we don't know how to talk to them.
Absolutely. You know? Well, how much do we learn talking with people with whom we already agree? Those conversations need to take place. I mean, for sure. I do enjoy talking to someone who agrees with me, who doesn't. But you know, we could talk about the civility of differing conversations that it's gotten a little more difficult over the last couple of decades or whatever.
Absolutely.
But when I'm truly able to sit down and have a civil conversation with someone that doesn't see things the way I do, which means they're wrong, of course. But, right? You know, that's how. But
it's so cute how they can be wrong and still have a conversation.
Gives me the opportunity to correct them.
That's right. That's right. Good for you.
But you know, it's when it can be civil, it's actually a lot of fun. And it's you mentioned taking food to people, and if I could just jump back here just a second. We did something that was it was talk about flying by the seat of my pants. It was just a wild, harebrained idea that we tried just to see how it would work, and it ended up becoming something that was like the cornerstone of our church. And our church was, you're in a bar. We're not in a bar. We were in rented space, but we were well, you know, you were there.
Yeah.
It's different.
Super cool. I love it.
Worship music for us was U2 and the Beatles and Foo Fighters, not necessarily Hillsong. So it was different. And we were able to engage people that were from a lot of backgrounds. We had close to half of our church were atheists or agnostics. And I find myself much more able to have civil conversations with atheists and agnostics about scripture and God and everything else than Christians, which I don't know how that works out, but it's just, it does. Maybe it's my fault, maybe my problem, I don't know. But anyway, one of the cornerstones of our church became this thing that we did once a week. We would go to a park and we would cook cheeseburgers and hot dogs, did potato chips and drinks. That's awesome. It was simple. But I got an email from a friend who he talked about, and he lives in San Francisco. He described what he does. He stays up all night on Friday nights walking the streets, and it's in the Tenderloin district, and it's pretty rough. And some of the things he did was maybe a little controversial to some, so I won't go into the great detail, but he would help, he would help guys dig through the dumpster. And this guy is a brilliant theological mind. And one of the, just a very respectable, decent person, you know, but he didn't want to be this respectable, decent person on Friday night. He wanted to go dig in dumpsters, and he went dumpster diving, and he helped people that were using some unclean things to help them to get to clean things. And I won't go into detail about that. You can figure it out, but he would sit down next to guys that were just gone on drugs, that were singing crazy songs, and he'd sing with them, leaning up against fences or whatever. And I read what he was talking about, and I said, I want that. What he's talking about, I want that. And so I got my grill. I went to a park. We set up, and I bought a box of cheeseburger patties, and I just showed up. And it was on Valentine's Day, 2011, I think.
That's awesome.
So we showed up and just started handing out cheeseburgers. And we didn't pray over the food. We didn't ask them to sit and listen to a Bible study first. We just fed. That's it. That's all we did. We didn't say we were from a church. We didn't say we believed in Jesus. We didn't do a thing religiously. We just handed out stuff. So that grew and grew and grew. But here was what we wanted to accomplish through this, and we did. And it was this has to be a cerebral recall, because if I get emotional about this, I'll be a blubbering, crying mess. You don't want to see it. So our goal was not to hand out the cheeseburger. Our goal was to go sit with them and talk to them while they ate. That was what we were there for. And oh my God, I can't even put words to it. To go sit on the ground, and each of them had their stories.
Yeah.
They were all CIA agents. They were there they were a government operative and all this stuff. They were Major League Baseball players. One of them was a former teacher at Harvard. And the stories were really, it was this attempt for them to retain some sense of self-dignity. It wasn't about them just telling big lying stories. It was like they wanted to be important.
Exactly.
And it was amazing over time how we would sit down on the ground with them and talk to them just about life. It was amazing how the stories went from, I used to be the vice president of the United States, to to what was real.
Yeah.
Because we looked them in the eyes and we talked to them. The cheeseburger was an excuse to get into their world. And getting into their world was the most incredible experience of my life. And hugging them, telling them, I love you. And what we never prayed a prayer. If they came up and asked for us to pray for them, sure, we'd do that.
Yeah.
But we didn't jump into any uninvited space. We just fed. That's it. We fed and gave them dignity. And the results of that is we watched a number of people get off the streets. We watched a number of people get their lives together. A lot of them were suffering from some pretty severe mental illnesses, so it really wasn't feasible for them to go get a job. But we watched a lot of lives turn around just from being there, getting involved in their lives in a community type setting, taking them seriously.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we had the right way and everybody else did it the wrong way. I don't mean it this way at all. But I got involved in a few feeding homeless whatever programs before we did what we did. And I watched everything done at like arm's length. You stink, don't get too close to me. That was clearly the impression that was given. And I was amazed at how well these people, they looked you in the eyes and they knew if you were photo op feeding or if you were actually there to be a part of their world. And on the very first day, this guy comes up to me. Okay, so I'll end the story with this. This guy comes up to me and he said, you're serious about this, huh? And he was one of the homeless guys. And I said, well, yeah. And he said, no, I don't. I mean, like you want to make a difference, huh? And I was, yeah, I do. He said, well, come over here and sit with me, and I want to give you a few pointers. And I just thought, well, this ought to be interesting.
Wow.
He started. You talk about somebody telling you about the scriptures that doesn't know the scriptures. It was amazing to have my eyes open to something that I thought I had the answer to, right? Like I knew how to fix all these people. And so the very first thing he said to me was, he said, don't ever try to fix me. He said, just don't do it. He said, leave me alone. If I want your help, I'll ask for it.
That's a lot of wisdom in that.
I was like, what? That was incredible to actually hear him say that. And then, and he gave me a lot of other pointers, but we ended up like building the framework of all that we did around his initial advice that day. And it was
That's
just,
awesome.
it was incredible to go back to what we're talking about. It was incredible to see what could come of genuine community, people that normally we wouldn't sit and hang around with. But it wasn't about filling their stomach. It was about fulfilling them emotionally and
Right.
getting them a place of dignity and getting involved in their lives. And how much it hurt when one of them, 68-year-old guy, was digging through someone's trash can. Someone came along and shoved him, and he fell off his bike, hit his head on the pavement.
Oh,
And a
man.
guy that we fed died that day in the street. And how much that affected us emotionally.
Oh, yeah.
People that came and we handed cheeseburgers to, we had at least 3 of them that stepped in front of trains here because they were just done. And it's amazing how much it goes from a story in the newspaper to, oh my God, my heart just got ripped out.
Right.
Because we were involved in their lives. And I think that switches over as well into the church, because somebody sitting in church, they can just be somebody on that pew, that seat. Yeah, whatever. Right. They go to their life, I go to my life, heck with them. But when we're actually involved in community, everything changes.
Right. Absolutely. And I think we've gone about 35 minutes now, so we'll just wrap up a couple closing thoughts, and we'll try to see what a good sweet spot is for the amount of time. But
okay.
The irony to me, my closing thoughts on this is, the irony to me of all of this is that a lot of people would say that I have more progressive theology, which is cool. Like, that's cool. I don't know. I have always kind of been a questioner. I question a lot. I doubt a lot. I investigate a lot. I try to make things make sense. I work hard at theology. And it looks pretty progressive, at least, to a lot of people. But the irony to me is that as my theology has become more progressive, I've started to take things in the Bible more literally, and it really works. And that's ironic to me, because like what you said, like when we just feed people, like I think of the story, the whole reason we got into trying to feed the kids is New Mexico's #1 in child poverty. And we figure that if we're going to be a church, and we should try to do something about that, right? And the reason that came up is that we were reading in the book of Mark about Jesus sends the disciples out to other towns in twos. Then they come back, and they're about to all go together to like debrief and talk about it. And some people found out about it, and like 5,000 people come and follow them. And so Jesus preaches to them, and they're all about to leave, and they're restless, and they're tired, and they're wanting to go. And then the disciples tell Jesus, hey, everybody's hungry, like send them on their way. And the thing Jesus tells them is, you feed them. You know, you feed them. That's like the thing that just like hit me in the heart. And I thought, well, what if we really just did this? Like, what if we just really took some of this stuff literally in the Bible, and we just did it? Like, okay, there's hungry people, we're just going to feed them. And the more I kind of the more progressive my theology gets, the more I start to take some of these things more literally, and actually just try to put them into action and put them into practice. We started a ministry that's still going in downtown Albuquerque called Breaking Bread, and the same thing happened. We went out to eat, and I was reminded of the story about the king, right, that invites a bunch of people, and they have excuses why they don't want to come to the party, and so then he just invites all the people from the street, and all the people come and eat. And while we're eating in kind of the Nob Hill area of Albuquerque, we're eating dinner, a bunch of people from church. And I was like, well, what if we just really did that? Like, what if we just took that story and we just literally did the thing that they said? Like, we're surrounded by hungry people right now. What if we just came here and ate and just shared the food with people, you know, and see how that goes? And that's still going. And this was 5 years ago, I think, 7 years ago. It was 7 years ago, and it's still going strong and better than ever. But it took me like I don't think that progressive theology means that people don't take the Bible seriously.
Right.
In fact, I know it doesn't, because I take the Bible very, very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, and even more often now than I ever have in my life, I take it literally. I take some of that literally, and it frees me out. It works that way, it works. And so so that makes me be able to have room for people that are maybe more conservative, more fundamentalist, more literal, because they're right. They're right about some of that, because I've seen it work, and it's worked in my life. And so to me, that allows me to be able to have conversations with people that think differently theologically than I do, because I have a lot I can learn from them. And I've spent a lot of time in Georgia, and other places around definitely more conservative people theologically, but it's helped me be able to tap into that and see like the beauty and see how that really does work, also. And we all have blind spots, but if we don't talk to the people that see our blind spots, we're never gonna see them. And so that's it's made more room in my mind for other voices.
So my view of Scripture has definitely evolved over time. I coming from a background of King James Version only, that everything is inerrant, infallible. They quote Jesus in Matthew to every jot and tittle, which are punctuation marks in, what is it, in Hebrew or Greek, whatever. I've been at that point of literalism, evolving now to where some days I'm not sure if there's a God or not. That's kind of the journey I've taken. Almost every day I do believe in God, but past that, I believe in God. Sometimes I'm not sure about a whole lot other than that. Mm-hmm. So I'm filled with doubts, but the more I doubt, this has been a weird process in my life. The greater my doubts, the more my faith is built. And I've had a lot of programming put into me. I've had a lot of teaching put into me. Like you said, all the answers have been given. And so when you've got all the answers, then there's really not much room for doubt. Well, all of a sudden doubt comes in. And I went through some experiences in religious settings, and going from Pentecostalism and leaving that into some other stuff. And I thought everything was going to be perfect and better, and it wasn't. It was kind of worse. And then I get to the point of doubting everything and getting a little bit cynical, which I didn't really like being a cynical person, but yet it opened the door for me to question things. Once I started to question things, and then actually not take everything so literally, because I had gone like from extreme literalism where I needed to back off of that a bit. And so having that space to doubt, having that space to say, yeah, I don't know about that. Let's look into that further. It's brought me to the point where I take the Bible probably less literally than I ever have in my life. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of contradictions in the Bible. I'm able to acknowledge that now, where before I had the apologetics to explain it all away,
Right.
Well, when it says Jesus died at this hour in one book and died at another hour in another book, here's the explanation for that. Well, you know what? They made a mistake. Like, yeah. Can we actually say, I get to say that now?
Yeah.
How are we saved, and what does it mean to be saved? Well,
yeah.
There are at least, like at the very minimum, there are about 80 pointedly different ways to be saved mentioned. And if you want to get even wider with it, up to, depending on interpretation, there are a couple hundred to 300 different ways to get saved. What are we going to do with that?
Right.
So I'm able to actually ask those questions and doubt them. And then the more I doubt, the more I'm able to actually believe something rather than be programmed with something. And I've gone from being programmed with information to actually believing. And it's an amazing, I actually feel like I can own my own faith now.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, I doubt the Bible more than I ever have in my life. Mm-hmm. And yet I love and as I doubt it more, and I'm able to acknowledge that some of the canonization process was a little funky, mm-hmm. In some places it was absolutely crooked what they did to work in certain books that fit their narrative more. I'm able to acknowledge those things where before that was a subject that was off limits. You couldn't even, like, you could not question the book. Martin Luther actually called the book of Hebrews, James, Jude, and Revelation. He called those 4 books ambush theology, and one of them thrown out of the Bible. You never hear that from anybody. No one ever talks about it, because it's like the Bible is this holy, hallowed piece of, like, we treat it like this idol. We idolize it, and it becomes a God to us. The Bible isn't God. It's a story about God. And so I've found that the less that, the more that I've doubted pieces of the Bible, the more I love it, the more real it becomes to me. And then in a weird way, I circle back to what you're saying, that I take some of these things I take them more seriously.
Yeah, you like rediscover them, right? And with like fresh eyes.
Totally.
In a way. Yeah.
Yes. Natalie takes this verse, my wife Natalie takes this passage out of Philippians, where it talks about, and genuinely take an interest in that other person and the things that they love. Yeah. Well, she read that when we were first married, and like, I loved golf. She didn't know anything about golf. I loved basketball. She didn't know anything about basketball. She actually subscribed. I didn't even know these things. She subscribed to basketball and golf magazines.
Wow.
So she could be a part of my world.
That's awesome.
Like, is that amazing?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Wow. Could we do that with each other? Like, you're talking about biking and being a biker. Yeah. I have no interest in motorcycles. In fact, I stay away from them, because if I ever got one, I'd kill myself. I know I would. I'm a daredevil. I'm a daredevil. I would be stupid. I guarantee it. So, but you know what? What if I actually took a genuine interest in the Harley culture, or wow, to actually become a part of somebody else's world? And you know what? Circling back, I think that's what community actually is
yeah, absolutely.
Getting involved in somebody else's world. Yeah.
And that's I think that's exactly right. That's a great way to wrap things up. I think when we started playing for these different groups, we did a lot of research about that. Like, what does this mean? What does that mean? How should you act? How shouldn't you act? What should you do? What shouldn't you do? Just out of respect, for people, because you don't want to accidentally show someone disrespect.
Absolutely.
And I know that motorcycle culture is all about respect, and there's so much we can learn. One day I want to write a book about that, what the church can learn from the biker clubs. I think that there's a lot of stuff there that they really get that we could learn a lot from in the church. And I think that's good stuff, man. It's good stuff.
And knowing how to read the room.
Exactly.
That rather than having our preset agenda. Or
expecting everyone to just cater to you.
Absolutely.
And what you're like when you walk in. And as preachers, we're used to that in a way, we're used to being the in charge or have some authority or respect,
Yeah.
One of my favorite things is walking in. I get to, since we have church during the week, I get to preach at different churches on Sunday. And sometimes I'll go into a church and I obviously look a lot different than normal preachers, and nobody expects, must be the preacher. So, sometimes people won't even tell me like where the coffee is. Like, people will just walk by me and ignore me if I ask, or I tell them hi. They won't make eye contact. Like crazy stuff. And then I'll get up and preach. And then after the service, those very same people are like, want to talk and want to, and it's like, well, what's the,
Exactly. What makes me different now than I was before? Yeah.
And so, but I love that, because it shows me and it keeps me honest. And hearing your story today, what I learned and my takeaway from this is that I want to be more, I used to be more like your friend. I used to be the one going out and doing the things, and I'm really taking the time to engage each person. As I've gotten older, I often feel like I don't have time for nonsense, or I don't have time to hear a story that's made up, or I don't have time to sit and engage someone that's just gonna, in my mind, to be honest, like waste my time is what it feels like. And I never used to be like that. And your story reminds me, or helps me realize how much I've been like that in the last few years of my life, and how that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. And I want to take the time, because I've seen the difference it makes when you just take the time to listen to someone's story. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. It doesn't matter. It's not for you. It's for them.
Absolutely.
And it's a gift that you give to them, and you end up benefiting from it every time, no matter what it is. And
crazy. Yes.
And that's my big takeaway. I want to be more like that.
Yeah. Can I tell you one quick thing?
Please.
I'll just take a minute with this. You ever heard of Warren Wiersbe?
Mm-mm.
Okay, he's one of the, like, he and the Message Bible. I'm blank.
Peterson, Eugene
Peterson. Although they would come from opposite ends of the progressive conservative spectrum, he was the president of Moody Bible Institute. He was just an incredible theologian. But so Warren Wiersbe was speaking at something that I went to. I was pushed to go to this. In fact, they paid my way, so I kind of had to go to this conference thing, and it was a little sort of a charismatic type thing. And Warren Wiersbe is not charismatic, but he was going to speak at this. And so, I'm sorry, I don't want to diss charismatics here, but I've been in the culture. I know what it's like. I showed up at this thing. I was uncomfortable, like, from the very beginning, because everybody is dressed, oh my God, to the max. I mean, it's like red carpet.
Wow.
We're at the Oscars, I mean, the cost of those suits, holy crap, is unbelievable. But I mean, everybody decked out to the max. In comes this little old guy, and he was hunched over. His hair was a mess. He looked like, his hair looked like Bernie Sanders sometimes, it's just, it was like everywhere. He was wearing a sport coat that had patches on the elbows. And in the year 2000, those were like, you had to be 20 years out of style to be wearing that in the year 2000. He had on hush puppy shoes. He had on his coat. Those old fake belts that were in the back of sport coats like forever ago? You probably don't even remember because it's too old for you, okay? He was wearing one of those. In other words, he couldn't possibly have been dressed worse if he tried. And so everybody is looking at him like, literally making faces, like they're going like this at him. So we get into this place and they introduce Warren Wiersbe. You know where this is going, right? And here walks up this guy. And it was like, there was this audible gasp in the crowd. It was awesome. And this guy gets up. I have never heard, it was not like emotional or real passionate type speaking. It was just, it was intense. And intensity and passionate to me is different, but it was so intense. And this guy was, oh my goodness, out of this world. Okay.
That's awesome.
So afterwards, okay, the throngs of people, like he was this superhero. Whereas 2 hours before, he had been this guy like, what's he doing here?
Yeah.
And it was like, what changed? Like, what changed? He was just as human 2 hours ago as he was now. Why wasn't he any good 2 hours ago? And I hear a lot of church musicians say this. I know that people only appreciate me for what I do on the organ or the music, whatever. And I want to be appreciated for being a person. I'm sorry, I have no idea what that has to do with community. I just totally went off the
No, but it has everything to do with it.
It does.
That's how we treat each other and what we're looking for from each other and how we judge. Like I feel like when I get to preach at a church for the first time, I get to show people, hey, don't be so quick to judge. Don't be so quick to assume. Don't be so quick. Like maybe they'll think about it. Maybe they'll think about it next time. Give it a second thought. Maybe, and that's all that I can do is be me and let people be critical if they want. But then hopefully they come around or they don't. But it's up to me to just be there and do my thing and be the best me that I can be.
Absolutely.
Some people are gonna like that. Some people aren't gonna like that. And I'm learning to come to terms with that. I mean, I want everyone to like me, like probably most people do, but I'm realistic enough to know that it's just not ever going to happen.
Yeah. And I was totally jealous of your hair when I first met you.
You're killing it now. Oh, yeah.
I'm kicking it. I want you to see this.
You're killing it.
Man, I passed you up 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. You're doing awesome, man.
I said, I want to be like Todd, and I wasn't just like Todd. I was way better than Todd. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Ben, thank you for being on this. Thank you for coming and hanging out. We'll talk more. We brought up about at least 4 topics to bring up and talk about more. So we'll do this again, and we'll maybe add a person or two, and and just kind of keep this going and see what it turns into. But thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Kendall, for being here. I'm Todd. This is the X-ile Conversations, and this is the first one, and we'll see what happens with this. Thanks a lot, everyone.